Hello and welcome to this Fury Warrior Mythic Plus guide. This guide is current as of patch 7.3.5 in the Legion expansion and should be current until the release of patch 8.0. If you want to take a look at my credentials, I will link my Armory, Raider.io and WoW Progress pages in the video description. Because this guide is quite long and you may only be here for information on a certain topic, I will put annotations on the screen right now to link you to the section you're looking for, or you can take a look in the video description for the timestamps. That's also the introduction, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of the guide. First, I would like to speak briefly about how Fury stacks up against Arms. As you may be aware, Arms is more popular in Mythic Plus at the moment. I get asked quite often in Mythic Plus groups why I play Fury and if Arms is not better. I would say that overall they are roughly as good, and I think Fury is one of the most underestimated specs in Mythic Plus at the moment. In terms of damage, Fury is a lot better on single target and boss fights, which is why you see not only a majority of warriors playing Fury in Mythic and Taurus, you also see Fury warriors being one of the highest logging specs in all of Taurus Mythic. In fact, if you look at the very top level of competition, Fury is only beaten by Affliction Warlocks in the 99th percentile of the cumulative log of all bosses. On AoE, which is mostly trash in Mythic Plus, Fury and Arms work in quite a similar way, which is to have huge damage during its cooldowns and then having a bit of downtime. Fury has very frequent burst windows, with a battle cry being on average a 33-second cooldown. Arms, on the other hand, has a bit longer time between its bursts. However, Arms does not wet noodle as much as Fury does in the downtime, and Arms also has higher burst when they actually do have all of their cooldowns. To sum up, Fury has more frequent and not quite as powerful burst windows. The reason Arms is very compelling is its ability to destroy priority packs during its burst. However, Fury can do this to quite a similar extent with good trinket usage, which will be discussed later. Lastly, Arms has the defensive stance talent, which comes in handy in a lot of situations, and many people think that Fury lack in the defensive department. While it is true that Fury only really has Enrage Regeneration as a defensive cooldown, apart from the group-wide commanding shout, there are quite some overlooked parts of Fury's kit. Because Fury has a larger health pool than any other non-tank spec in the game, Prydas is better for Fury than for any other class or spec. This, in conjunction with the fact that Fury only takes increased damage while Enraged, makes for a very high effective health pool. This is especially true since you can proc battle scars without the Enrage buff. More on that later. Let's talk about gear. Apart from the basic stuff like the tier 21 4-piece, you will need a few things. For trinkets, you will need Convergence of Fates, which you will have equipped at all times. After this, you need Kaskaroth's Courage for single target and Terminus Signaling Beacon for AoE. It should be noted that you cannot loot Terminus Signaling Beacon yourself, since it is only dropping for range DPS. However, someone can trade it to you and you can get it via Master Lure. If you don't have access to this trinket, you can use Umbral Moonglaves instead. Finally, it is good to have Smoldering Titan Guard for when you need an extra defensive, for example on Herja in Halls of Valor. In terms of legendaries, you need Valar Berserkers, Solo the Battle Lord, Cianar Charger, Nagentus Vertebrae, Sefu's Secret, and Prydas. It is also nice to have Timeless Stratagem and Agramar Stride. You want to make a few equipment sets using these. The ones I use are these. The Helm and the Pants, and you will use this on most bosses and single target trash. And then we have the Pants and the Massacre Ring. You will use this on high keys and especially on Tyrannical, where the fight lasts long enough or the execute phase lasts long enough that the Massacre Ring overtakes the Helm. Then you will want a set with Sefu's and the Belt, which you will use on most of the trash. You also need a set with the Belt and the Pants, which you will use on trash where you cannot proc Sefu's. Prydas and Avoidance and Pants will be used on bosses or trash where you would otherwise die. Finally, you need a speed set. This should be the boots and the shoulders, and then as much speed gear as you can. Keep in mind that you should have a speed set that includes your on-use trinket, so probably the Terminal Signaling Beacon, in the same slot as your other gear sets to avoid putting it on cooldown when you're swapping into your speed set. Personally, I have two different speed sets, one with Terminus and one without it. This means that if you're going to use Terminus on the next pull after using your speed set, you shouldn't put Terminus on a 30-second cooldown. Finally, I swap between these sets with keybound macros that I will show in the macro section. As for talents, you will almost always use the setup shown on screen now. The only change you will ever make is to take Wrecking Ball instead of Avatar, but this rarely happens. Avatar is generally better because you can use it to burst, which fits better in Mythic Plus. Wrecking Ball is good on fortified teaming in certain dungeons, like Blackrook Hold, where there are a lot of big trash packs. Remember, even if you may do more overall damage with Wrecking Ball, it may not have come at a time where damage was necessary, since Mythic Plus in a lot of cases is about bursting down high priority targets or packs. You should always bring a lot of consumables to Mythic Plus. These include pylons, drums, invis pots, avalanche pots, prolonged pots, old war pots, sky steps pots, mastery food, or sugarfish if you're rich, and strength flasks. You can get health stones even if your group does not have a warlock by queuing up to proving grounds in Dalaran and getting them in there and then just porting out. If you're an engineer, you should have a frag belt and you can use this to interrupt casts. If you don't have the Lightforged Augment rune, you should bring regular Augment runes. You should always try to pre-pot every pull unless it will stop you from pre-potting on the next boss. If it's an AoE pack, you use Prolonged Power, otherwise you use Old War. Since this guide focuses on Mythic Plus and your rotation will be just about the same in Mythic Plus as in other types of content, I will not be discussing it here. I will instead link Archimtiros, I think that's how you say his name. I will link his Fury Warrior guide in the video description, and I think that's definitely the place to start if you're unsure about the rotation. I will also link the Fury Warrior Discord where you can ask questions about anything Fury related. The only real thing to add for rotation in Mythic Plus is to keep in mind that sometimes you have to hold your cooldowns for priority packs or bosses, but other than that you will be using the same rotation as you do outside of Mythic Plus. There are several macros that are really useful in Mythic Plus that you may not already have just from raiding. First of all is to have all of your cooldowns be combat only. This is done by using a macro shown on the screen right now. This stops you from ever popping your cooldowns accidentally out of combat. Other than that, it is very useful to have equipment set macros. Personally, my Pridas and Speed set are simply dragged onto the bar and keybound as is, but my other sets are swapped between to use as few keybindings as possible. So for example, if I press Shift T, I swap between having Helm and Pants and Cephus and Belt, and if I press Shift 5, I swap between having Pants and Ring and Belts and Pants. And then if I am in Pridas or Speed set, I will simply go back to my AoE sets by using one of these other keybindings. This swapping is done by equipping a shirt in only one of your sets that you're swapping between and not in the other, and then using conditions in your macro as is shown on the screen right now. There are a lot of important Weakauras to use in Mythic Plus, and I will try to list the ones that I use specifically for M+ below. First of all is a Weakaura called Effective HP. This Weakaura shows you how much magic or physical damage you can take at any given moment. More importantly, it shows you how much HP you will have left after an upcoming boss ability. So, if it's a negative number or a very small number, you perhaps want to use a cooldown or ask your healer to top you off. The next one is Legion Dungeons, and it simply is a enormous collection of Weakauras to show you just about everything that will happen in any dungeon. So just import it, put it wherever you want it on the screen, and you will be a lot more aware of what's going on around you in the dungeons. Next is Mythic Plus Interrupt Tracker. Shows the cooldown of your party members' interrupts so that you can coordinate. Then we have Tears CDs. Shows important cooldowns for your party like externals or utility CDs, etc. And finally we have AW Battle Res, which shows how many battle reses you have available and when more will come up. Then of course I use regular Weakauras for DPSing as Fury, but that's not really part of the Mythic Plus guide. In this final section, I wanted to bring up some things that didn't really fit into anything else. For example, the Enrage buff increases your damage taken by 15% when the Warpaint talent is taken, otherwise 20%. Now, this is fine in some certain situations, but on some bosses you need to make sure not to be enraged when big damages come in, such as on the last boss in Dark Heart Thicket or on the Naga boss in Eye of Ashara. However, when you are enraged, you have increased health through a artifact trait called Battle Scars. Interestingly enough, you can activate Battle Scars by using Berserker Rage. This means that what you want to do if you need some extra health is to simply make sure to not be enraged, which is just don't crit with Bloodthirst or whatever for 4 seconds, and then actually pop Berserker Rage so that you get the increased health but not the extra damage taken. This will make you just a little bit more tanky. And remember, since Pridas scales with your max health, this will make your Pridas stronger as well. Don't forget that you can use Piercing Howl to slow enemies if you get aggro or if your group is just trying to kite. And also, Intimidating Shout can be used to break a lot of different casts that cannot be broken by simply interrupting. When using Terminus Signaling Beacon, it is important to remember that if you are in melee range and pop it, the ship will destroy itself. So, to make use of this trinket properly, what you want to do is to first cast it and then charge into combat. If you're using it mid-combat, simply run or leap out, use the trinket and then charge back in. This will make sure that the trinket can stay alive for its whole duration and deal its maximum damage. Finally, I just wanted to bring up a hidden setting called Spell Queue Window that used to be in the in-game options under the name Custom Lag Tolerance. What the Spell Queue Window does is it defines how long the global cooldown ends that you can queue up your next ability. If you queue a spell and press another spell before the queued spell is cast, it is supposed to simply overwrite your old ability. This does not seem to work the way it is intended to when playing with the default setting of 400 milliseconds. I personally use 160 milliseconds, but you should test it out and see what feels good for you. If you had changed your settings prior to patch 7.2 when the new default of 400 was introduced, your settings would have been wiped. Playing with the default feels incredibly laggy and unresponsive to me, and I can't recommend enough that you look into it. An example of where this really matters is when you want to cast a stun in Mythic Plus, but you don't manage to break your already queued ability and your stun goes off 1 GCD later. That's it for my Fury Warrior Mythic Plus guide. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and thank you for watching.